Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
Episode 76, The Multi-Talented Mr Peirce. Augustus Peirce, amongst many things, was a paddle steamer captain. And I've long held a fascination of the paddle steamer industry, particularly around Echuca, near where I live. And I remember as a child watching all the rivers run and imagining myself as being the wife of a paddle steamer skipper and going up and down the river and thinking how amazing that would have been. And if I lived back in that time, that's what I would have chosen. About 200 paddle steamers worked on the river and used Echuca as their hub. Echuca's wharf was built in 1865 and it was a scene of activity second only to Melbourne. It had 3 levels and coped with the changing levels of the river. Echuca is the closest river port to Melbourne and received the river trade from Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria for carriage by rail to and from Melbourne. The sheer volume of traffic is perhaps best illustrated by the fact that in its heyday, Echuca boasted 79 hotels. Augustus Baker Pierce, an American, was a colourful sailor, riverboat captain, actor, ventriloquist, raconteur and artist. He was born on the 7th of October 1840 at West Medford, Massachusetts, USA. He is recorded still living with his family in Massachusetts in 1859 at the age of 19. However, he started a career with the US Navy and he was a sailor on the Oriental, which left New York Harbour on the 27th of September 1859 and it arrived at Port Phillip on the 12th of January 1860. This is when Augustus deserted ship by swimming ashore. His first job when he arrived at Port Phillip was an ostler, which was a person that took care of horses, and that was at the Cobb & Co stables. He then went up to Bendigo and he got employment in John Ely's bowling alley and shooting gallery under the old Lyceum Theatre. He painted scenery while he was there at the Lyceum Theatre, and he even recalled years later how he met Lola Montez there, who I covered in episode 70. He also worked as a photographer for Batchelder's. He embarked on other occupations while he was living around Bendigo, selling meat pies for George Milbank at New Inglewood and selling Frank Weston's Wizard Oil in Dunolly. There is a record in a newspaper on the 7th of February 1861. Violent assault. Gian Panula remanded on the charge of violently assaulting a man named Augustus Peirce at Inglewood. He shipped as a sailor on the steamer Otago for Dunedin in Auckland, New Zealand. Finding nothing of interest or promise in New Zealand, Peirce returned in the Otago to Sydney, where he worked his passage to Melbourne in Howard Smith's pioneer steamer, You Yangs. He made his way back down to the Bendigo area, and in January 1863, Gus and another amateur photographer left Bendigo with a wagon and pair for Castle Donington, near Swan Hill in Victoria, to get photos of objects of interest for an exposition to be held in London. He quarrelled with his partner and left him, and that's when Peirce went snake hunting with Shires, the famous inventor of a snakebite cure, in inverted commas. James Shires was known for the remarkable way that he handled venomous snakes. And 22 years later, Augustus actually met Shires back in Melbourne, where Shires was giving an exhibition on snake charming at Frank Weston's Opera House. In 1863, he travelled by the steamboat the Murray to Wentworth, where he acted as a bailiff for the white Chinaman John Egg. So John Egg was well known on the river, and he had a business and he employed Gus as the person to go and settle his debts. And he needed to go and gain money out of a family of acrobats. John Egg later was known as Captain John Egg. He himself was a captain on riverboats on the Murray. On the 16th of October 1863, there was an article outlining a burglary that occurred at the house of Mary Richards, who was the proprietress of the Golden Fleece in Curry Street, Adelaide. And it mentioned that Augustus Peirce, photographic artist, was a lodger at Mrs. Allen's and he identified a coat and waistcoat found with the prisoners, which he left on a chair in his bedroom, which had not been locked. Later, he joined the Lady Daly, and he was an assistant and acted as an oarsman, and his assignment on the Lady Daly was to chart the Murray River from Albury to Goolwa. He recorded all the navigational features and compiled a strip map. He navigated a lot in a canoe with the help of an Aboriginal tracker. It was supposed to have been the first chart of the river for steamer use. In 1864, he joined the Lady Daly more permanently as a pilot. His skill and ability apparently made his captain, James Mace, jealous. Mace dumped his belongings on the wharf at Blanchetown while he was in the pub. Gus then sailed to Madras in the bark Europa with horses for the British troops. On his return, his hope was that he was going to be captain of the Lady Daly. However, the river fell and the Lady Daly was put in Blanchetown. And when the captain went to Adelaide, Captain Lindsay, who he'd gone to Madras with, was made captain instead of him, and he was disgusted. After 2 short trips with Lindsay, the boat was put into commission and Pierce was put on half pay. So he went to Adelaide and he was employed by a photographer, McCormick, for a short time, and then by Duryea, whom he taught to make ambrotypes. This was a technique where you would have an underexposed glass negative that you placed against a dark background, and then the dark backing material created a positive image. After a few weeks, he went back to Goolwa. Gus recommenced his position on the Lady Daly and was soon promoted to captain. He was skipper in 1964 and 1965. He was also master of the Cumberuna and then the Corowa in 1968 to 1969. He then owned and skippered the Jane Eliza in 1871, which he named after his mother. Then the Victoria in 1873 to 1875, and then the Riverina in 1876. He was a well-known character along the Murray and the Darling. Due to the rise and fall of the river, there used to be downtime. So this is where Gus Peirce decided he would earn some money with his other talents. In March 1867, at the East Adelaide Assembly Rooms, in conjunction with the San Francisco minstrels, Mr A.B. Pierce, the world-renowned ventriloquist and comedian, will appear for a few nights only. There he is in March doing a little bit of showmanship, but he's back in the boats by November 1867 for Waganya and Albury, Murray and Jackson's splendid steamer, Lady Daly, Augustus R. Pierce, commander, the most powerful steamer on the river and whose passenger accommodation is unsurpassed, will be dispatched from the Echuca Wharf on the 12th of November. By the time it comes to the 21st of December 1867, for Goolwa, South Australia, calling at all intermediate ports and places, the powerful steamer Lady Daly, Augustus B. Pierce, commander, will be dispatched from the Echuca Wharf. In July 1868, he's now on the new steamer the Corowa. Captain A.B. Pierce will leave Echuca on the 17th of July to steam to Waganya, Corowa and Albury. And it seems while he's over that way, on the 18th of August 1868, the Varieties Corowa, the first of a series of popular readings and varieties on Tuesday evening, Captain Augustus Pierce, USN. And then 3 weeks later, in September 1868, a genius. The Ovens Advertiser pays the following tribute to the genius of Captain Gus Peirce. Being an old and well-known resident of Sandhurst, the season so far has been very unpropitious for river traffic. Just at the time when we're expecting business to be brisk here, we find it unusually dull. The Cumberuna, Captain Mace, is lying in ornery in Colandina, and the Corowa, Captain Pierce, in like circumstances at this place. The crews of both vessels have been discharged, but after all, the detention of the Corowa is a matter of congratulation to the pleasure-seeking and charitably disposed inhabitants of each border town, as the varied accomplishments of the highly gifted captain of the Corowa are hourly developing themselves for the gratification of his numerous admirers. In December 1868, 2 serious accidents on 2 succeeding evenings occurred last week to the Brockleslee buggy, which was employed to convey the amateurs to the rehearsal of the forthcoming burlesque of Blue Beard. On each occasion, the very gallant, intrepid and variously accomplished commander of the Corowa steamer, Captain Augustus Baker Pierce, USN, had a narrow escape of losing his valuable life and of being prematurely cut off in the flower and bloom of his promising youth. But his guardian angel interfered to save him and prevented his getting into the buggy when the accident occurred. He has since been warmly congratulated by a numerous circle of ardent and enthusiastic admirers, and it's pleasing to report that the Bluebeard has not lost his adorable Fatima by these dreadful accidents. As you would have noticed, Augustus featured in the new Theatre Corowa, and his show is called Bluebeard at Last. On Tuesday, the 15th of December, Fatima, Captain Augustus Baker Pierce, USN. And a month later, he's still there, and it's saying the late clerical scandal trial at Corowa. The photographs from original pencil sketch by Captain Augustus Baker Pierce of the bench, bar, prisoner and reporter can be had at Messrs Newison and Lyson Beechworth, Crawford Star Hotel Chiltern, Booth Rutherglen, Worthington Waganya and Weir Corowa. So he's spreading his wings and making a little bit of money by doing pencil sketchings at a notable court case that had occurred. A couple of days later, Varieties at Corowa, a complimentary benefit, Captain Augustus B. Pierce, USN, in recognition of many services in aid of several local and charitable institutions. And there was an article outlining the benefit. Captain Pierce's benefit at Corowa. The long-talked-of entertainment for the benefit of Captain A.B. Pierce came off at the Varieties Corowa on Saturday evening in the presence of a crowded audience who seemed heartily to enjoy the bill of fare presented for their amusement. The great feature of the evening was the extraordinary versatility displayed by their beneficiaire, who seemed to equally be at home in whatever he undertook. In fact, we should much like to know what Captain Pierce cannot do. On Saturday, he first made us shake our sides with laughter by his comic singing. Then he danced the cachuca in the character of Fatima, and as soon as that was over, he metamorphosed himself into a darkie. He delivered Mark Antony's address to the Romans, and finally again played in a Negro farce. The only fault was the excessive length of the program, there being too much both for the time and the money. We trust that the intrepid commander of the Corowa will reap substantial benefit and that we soon shall see and hear him again. At the end of that month, he was at the Royal Victoria Theatre in Wangaratta on the 28th of January. Captain A.B. Pierce featured. He did ventriloquism. He also sang a song and did a comic duet. On the 13th of April 1869, it was titled But They Called Him George. We suppose that nearly everyone in this district by this time knows Captain Pierce, USN, who leads such a curious life, who amuses everyone with whom he comes in contact. During the low water season, it's almost impossible to say where he is to be found. Just now, we find him mentioned in all the Melbourne papers as having taken part in performances at the Theatre Royal Melbourne, where he appears to have taken a prominent part in the entertainment for the benefit of Mr Akehurst, the author of the burlesque of the Battle of Hastings, which has had such a run. Even the Argus, so sparing in praise, says that an original song and some ventriloquial effects, being very clever, were highly successful. The other papers were loud in their praises of the gallant captain, and an advertisement referring to the Theatre Royal, "The coming man, Captain Gus Pierce, has arrived and will appear at the Theatre Royal tonight." In that same year, Gus created a panorama. Now, panoramas were quite large painted sceneries, and they were attached to boardings similar to a backdrop. And he painted a panorama that he titled A Voyage Around the World. Panoramas were unrolled across the stage with the entertainer lecturing out the front. Music, dancing, songs, juggling and other artistry rounded out the entertainment. It was mentioned at Castlemaine, Victoria on the 1st of May 1869. Captain Gus Pierce gave his variety entertainment at the theatre on Wednesday night, and the audience was as numerous as it ought to be at free admissions. The program of Captain Gus Pierce is after the Westonian model, but a novelty so far, was introduced by some feats of ventriloquism, which were very successful. The songs were well received, and the whole seemed to be a take. At the conclusion, the inevitable alleviator was introduced, but the patronage was not commensurate with the curative powers of the nostrum attributed by its lecturer. Captain Gus Pierce will revisit Castlemaine. The alleviator, we believe, was a new cure for a headache. So to earn some extra cash, he began to try to sell medicines at the end of his shows. And he was even rumoured to have conducted seances to get some extra money. And there was an ad to reflect that, and he actually called his show The Alleviator Man, and that was in Malden. A couple of weeks later, at the Theatre Royal in Melbourne, he's mentioned as being in a show, and it said, Maid and the Magpie came last, and there was a song between Captain Gus Pierce, which song had better been left cut. I do not think that Captain Gus Pierce is a desirable acquisition to a performance at the Theatre Royal if the song he sang, and which the bills described as successful entertainment, be a sample of what he can do. The point of the successful entertainment seemed to be the proffering of a piece of advice that it is better to get drunk again. So one of the rare, not so glowing reviews of Gus's work. A week later, he was at the Royal Haymarket Theatre. Farewell Nights of the Pantomime Company. Captain Gus Pierce with his characteristic entertainment. By August, he's back in the boat. So A.B. Pierce, master of the Corowa, from Waganya with a cargo of colonial wine, heading to Echuca. And at this time, Gus left the steamer Corowa to court a young lady who lived at Rutherglen, but the river rose rapidly and the boat, the Riverina, had actually passed him. Gus was sacked after bringing this cargo through to Echuca. The boss ended up putting somebody else in the boat as the skipper, but that skipper grounded the boat. So the boss ended up going back to Gus and said, you can have your job back, but only if you marry, as I don't want you to be missing for several days while you are courting. So as a result, he did marry the lady he was courting, Agnes Elizabeth Clare Carney. He married her in Moama, New South Wales in 1869. Agnes had actually already given birth to their first child, Augustus Baker Pierce Jr., in 1868, and this was registered in Balmain in New South Wales, which is where her mother lived. On the 29th of September 1869, Pierce's Panorama. As a local production and one of a superior kind, Pierce's Panorama calls for a more prominent and extended notice than we are in the habit of giving to exhibitions of this kind. Captain Gus Pierce, by whom it was painted, is by no means an unknown man. From one end of the valley of the Murray to the other, the name of the skipper of the Lady Daly and the Corowa is familiar as a household word. It is not strange to the people of Adelaide, nor wholly unknown to those of Melbourne. In Castlemaine, it would be remembered well by the older residents of Sandhurst, and most of them are aware that as a versatilityist he is a success. At any rate, this must be admitted of a man who can command a steam vessel, paint a panorama, and do a variety of things, besides which most men would find considerably difficult in doing with equal facility and success. Finding himself for a time without a ship, he betook himself to the paintbrush, and in the course of some 3 or 4 weeks, to the surprise of his friends and acquaintances, produced the panorama of which we're about to speak. It is of an American view. He is now engaged in painting 6 more pictures, in which we understand he will delineate views on the Great Pacific Railway and some other interesting scenery in the US. When they are finished, he will again exhibit in Echuca, and when his arrangements are all completed, it is his intention, we learn, to take a tour through the colonies, and we have no doubt it will be successful in its results, as he can wish. We hope the Echucans on his next night will give him a bumper house. So another son, Edward, was born in Echuca in 1870, but he was known as Albert Edward in all other documents. So unfortunately, though, for Gus, about a year later, after his panoramas were lauded, on the 13th of August 1870, he had declared bankruptcy. Augustus Baker Pierce of Echuca, master mariner, his liabilities were £213. His assets £5, leaving a deficiency of £208. Gus recollected that in the flood that occurred in Echuca in 1870, he had to rescue his wife and his small son from the second story of his home and convey them in a boat to the Echuca Town Hall, as the ground on which the town hall stood was only 2 feet underwater. And as the river fell and the Jane Eliza was laid up, Pierce then painted his panorama. So he went on the road. The first time we see him doing his shows is on the 28th of March 1871. He's at Beechworth at the St George's Hall. Captain Gus Pierce's grand moving panorama, A Voyage Around the World, portraying all the principal places of interest, including scenes from the American, New Zealand and European wars. And a week later, in the local paper in Echuca, our old friend Captain Gus Pierce is creating quite a sensation in the Ovens district by his original style of lecturing. A contemporary compliments him in the following terms. As a showman, Captain Gus Pierce is unrivalled, and his quaint, amusing remarks, interspersed with anecdotes, original and select, shows that if he has not actually secured the great Artemis's mantle, he has at least caught a hold of a piece of its skirts. He is drawing good houses wherever he goes. By June 1872, so about a year later, Augustus Baker is managing a travelling panorama, and he's at Hill End near Bathurst in New South Wales. And he's up around that area as they are goldfields. So he sets up his base at Bathurst and he undertakes several tours of Mudgee, Gulgong, Tambaroora, Hill End, Peel and Orange. He took his family with him, and it says that one of the tours was not so successful. Pierce writes, "I opened at Orange and the venture fell flat. I returned to Bathurst, leaving the paintings for my hotel bill." And it seems from what I've read that Gus Pierce liked to tipple, and there were comments by other paddle steamer men that he should have made millions, but he was always broke. And quite often he would settle the bill by doing some paintings on the walls of pubs. So in April 1871, Captain Gus Pierce's entertainment. This amusing company is announced to give a final entertainment in Beechworth at St George's Hall on Friday, and will be introduced by both Captain Pierce and Mr Kendall. On Saturday, they're appearing at Chiltern. So he does a little bit of coming back to where he knows he is successful. He does go back up to New South Wales, though, in July and August 1871. The review in the Gulgong Guardian of Saturday, July the 15th says, Captain Pierce's panorama, this amusing and instructive entertainment opened at Cogden's Assembly Rooms before a tolerably filled house. The panorama comprises views of places of historical and geographical interest in various parts of the globe, and each picture has been painted with considerable artistic taste. The Port Phillip Heads is a very striking view, and the lights on the lighthouse and on the board ship, and in the glittering of the moonlight on the water, gives the picture of lifelike reality. Captain Gus Pierce gave an excellent comic singing, and also brought down the house. Captain Pierce's lecture is one of the cleverest in its way that we have listened to for many a day, and the laughter it drew from the audience was frequent and hearty. The captain is an eloquent talkist, his wit being of an American school, and we advise all who suffer from lowness of spirits to go and hear him. The panorama will stay here for a few nights longer, and we can promise those who visit to be a pleasant evening's enjoyment. He created a further series showing at his Hill End 10 Theatre in 1872, where he joined up with William Gibb to do a musical review. William Gibb went on to write the first Broadway musical. The 10th Theatre only operated for 6 weeks, but Gus decided to stay on in Hill End. He decided to do some mining, and he found employment as a mining surveyor and a draftsman. His memoir describes building a wattle and daub house and lining it with bits of leftover panoramas. In late 1872, Gus painted the interior of the Dodds Hotel in Hill End, and this was reported in the South Australian Advertiser on the 7th of November 1872. We learn that a gentleman well known in Adelaide, and still more so on the Murray, has transferred his talents and varied accomplishments to the most flourishing of the New South Wales goldfields. We must congratulate Gus Pierce upon the admirable manner in which his facile brush and inventive powers he has conferred beauty on the wall of the Dodds Hotel, Clark Street. He has portioned off the walls of the bar, parlours, into panels, upon which he has depicted with great skill a variety of beautiful objects. Over the door leading into the bar into the passage, he's created the figure of the Goddess of Liberty, reclining upon the back of America's eagle. We have no doubt that many will be induced to follow the example of Tommy Dodds and engage the services of one who can make a dingy bar wall and bar parlour things of beauty and joys forever. Pierce painted the interiors of a range of hotels, including scenes of the Niagara Falls at the Niagara Hotel in Melbourne, and the Royal Arms of Britain on the bar of the room wall of the patriotic British hotel keeper in Wentworth. The family is still recorded in early 1874 as living at Hill End. He does a show in Dubbo on the 22nd of November 1873. Gus Pierce's entertainment. On Monday and Tuesday evenings, Mr Gus Peirce gave 2 of his entertainments at the Exchange Hotel. The attendance on both occasions was tolerably good, though there is no doubt, had Mr Peirce's advent been fully announced, he would have had a bigger audience. The entertainment was very good and consisted of a panorama of Australian views, singing and ventriloquism, and sleight of hand. Mr Peirce is very clever, not only as a vocalist but also as a talker. His comicalities never fail to, as Artemis Ward says, knock the public. He has a happy, dry way of describing a picture or a town. He makes you laugh before you are aware of it. And altogether, an hour spent with Mr Peirce is not thrown away. And a couple of months later, on the 14th of January 1874, our old friend Captain Gus Peirce appears to be making a successful progress through the Riverina. He was at Wagga on the 10th, still travelling with the panorama of his own painting. A few weeks later, in February 1874, Rice's Company. This company appeared at the Star Theatre Chiltern on Saturday night and received the well-deserved approval of a good audience. We learn that Captain Gus Peirce has joined the company. He gave one of his comic songs as a speech, which it was difficult to understand, but was sufficiently humorous to excite the visible faculties of the audience to the fullest extent. The captain will be a great requisition to the company. A couple of months later, Mr Peirce will exhibit his show, weather permitting, at Rochester, Runnymede and the neighbouring centres of population prior to shipping for the season on board his old craft Lady Daly. To those who have not seen the panorama, we have no hesitation in saying that they should not lose any opportunity that may present itself of doing so. But well worth looking at, as the pictures are, is so amusing and clever that to call his exposition as entertainment is certainly no misnomer. His tricks, his wit, his descriptive lecture and his humorous recitals are in their way inimitable. All those who appreciate the value and enjoyment of a genuine hearty laugh should see the show. And on the 15th of April 1874, he was at the Shire Hall, Echuca. Captain Augustus Baker Pierce will exhibit his Panopticon of English, Australian and American scenery with songs and anecdotes of many lands on over 5,000 feet of canvas, assisted by G.H. Kendall, music by Wright and Towle, midday performances for children. And there was an article related to this. Mr Gus Peirce will once more essay to amuse an Echuca audience. He will be ably assisted by Kendall, Wright and Towle, all of the men of excellent repute in their particular spheres. Captain Peirce has added some newly painted pictures to his panorama, which includes views of the Echuca Wharf and London Bridge, while in other respects the excellence of the entertainment will be fully up to the mark. What with the really good music, vocal and instrumental, Peirce's inimitable descriptions and stories, sleight of hand, ventriloquism, marvellous automatons, and no end of fun and drolly, we are promised a racy few hours with the captain. By June 1874, he's back on the Victoria, and it states on the 23rd of June 1874 that he'll depart from Echuca for Wagga and intermediate ports. And as mentioned before, he often settled his drinks bill by painting murals on hotel walls. And he actually painted the interior of the Steam Packet Hotel in Echuca. And the Riverina Herald on the 27th of January 1876 wrote, "Hotel decoration. Lovers of art will be rewarded by visiting the Steam Packet Hotel, its enterprising proprietor having converted it to a most attractive pictorial exhibition. It is ornamented on all sides with handsome paintings, all of an eminently Australian type, and executed in the highest order of the artistic excellence and taste. Prominent among the pictures is a beautifully executed sign of the house fronting the bar, comprising of a view of symmetrical and handsome river steamer of magnificent proportions under full steam on the Murray, towing a barge loaded to overflowing with a cargo of wool, the scene depicting the Riverina trade in the height of its prosperity. This will undoubtedly provide highly increased patronage. The well-known local artist Mr Gus Peirce has designed and executed the whole of the paintings, which do him the greatest credit." And sadly, the building caught fire a few years later and all of those paintings are destroyed. However, 2 of his paintings of the 1870 flood are on display today in the Echuca Museum. Gus was initiated into the Echuca Freemasons in 1875. And in February 1875, it mentions that at the Shire Hall that he's Panopticon on over 5,000 feet of canvas with new scenes, descriptions of the life in Salt Lake City, new songs and sayings by Pierce, Kendall, Westrop and Brown, and music by Wright, Smythe and Short. By the end of 1875, he has a grand evening in the drawing room at the courthouse at Moama. He did 3 comic songs as part of that night. In February 1876, IXL Minstrels. This troupe of minstrels, albeit for the most part local amateurs, appeared at the Shire Hall on Tuesday night and were most successful. The program each night opened with an exhibition of Gus Peirce's Panopticon, a series of wall-painted scenes, graphic in their portraiture, fidelity and artistic effect. The artist accompanied the exhibition with an interesting and explanatory lecture, interspersed with amusing jokes and songs given by various members of the company. The music was excellent and deserving of a special commendation. And by the winter, he's back in the boat. 29th of July 1876, Gus Peirce is now captaining the Riverina, and it left Echuca with the barge Energetic and will be picked up by her consort, the Undaunted, before the Murrumbidgee is reached. A year later, Mr Peirce's benefit. There is no doubt of the local popularity of Mr Gus Peirce. It is unmistakably shown last night. He had a full house at his benefit and was a prime favourite all through the piece, and that was in Echuca. As in late 1877, he moved to Adelaide, where with a partner he ran an advertising business and edited the paper Figaro. And he's obviously doing a little bit of entertainment while he's over there, as on the 20th of September 1877, it says Captain Gus Peirce at White's Rooms, Adelaide. There was a full attendance on Thursday evening to witness the excellent views of America's grandest scenery and enjoy a change of program in regard to the other portion of the entertainment. Captain Gus Peirce, described as the illustrious Murray circumnavigator and flatboat commodore, the Stanley of inland Victoria, prestigiator, lecturer, ventriloquist and humorist, presented himself during an interval, and although he did not make an exhaustive exhibition of his unnumbered talents, he succeeded at the first attempt in winning over his audience. He gained a treble encore for his comic songs, which, by the way, are very original in style and remarkable in execution. He first sang in a clear voice a comic song entitled Tommy Dodd, during which he repeatedly swallowed a white pellet and produced it in the next instant with that astonishing rapidity which can only be explained by the vague statement that's the quickness of the hand that deceives the eye. Being recalled 3 times, he substituted an amusing song with a very appropriate action, which created roars of laughter, and then came a witty speech on happiness with good effect, causing a great round of applause. Captain Gus Peirce has the most original vein of humour, and it is difficult to say which causes the greatest amusement, the comic character of his songs or his humorous fashion of giving them. At the last encore, he came forward and made a characteristic speech which created almost as much laughter as his previous performance, and it could easily be seen that he has already become a favourite. By May 1878, so around 7 or 8 months later, the intrepid commander, Captain Gus Peirce, or as he was known to his intimates in this district as the intrepid commander, is still in the land of the living. Since taking an affecting leave from this district some years ago, our old friend has visited many climes and turns his dexterous hand to much practical use. He became a contributor to a South Australian illustrated journal. This not satisfying his ambition, he, in conjunction with an old pard, started a journal of their own, the South Australian Figaro, and was soon cleaned out. The literary enterprise proved unsuccessful. The commander shook the South Australian dust off his feet and about 5 months ago made for Ballarat, where he now resides. During the last few months, he's been engaged in the twofold object of painting a gorgeous panorama with which he intends to do the colony at some future time, and drafting advertising maps for sale. This latter occupation brings much grist to the mill. Things are looking up, he says. Shares are rising, and if anyone wishes to borrow £200,000 or £300,000, they know where to apply. Whether in the zenith of success or in the greatest straits, the intrepid commander has some sort of Mark Taplian philosophy about him, which is as refreshing and spontaneous as are the frolics of an amorous cat on a tiled roof at midnight. And that was from the Rutherglen News. A month later, he's in Beechworth, the intrepid commander. Most people in this district know Captain Gus Peirce, who during his eventful career has played many parts and who is one of the most universal geniuses we ever have met with. During the past few days, he's been on a visit to Beechworth and he's going through the district with an advertising sheet. All the drawings are singularly tasteful, accurate and delicate, are the work of himself and his partner Mr Jackson, and afterwards lithographed. The captain is as ingenious and amusing as ever, and during his stay gave a quiet evening's entertainment to a number of his friends who fully appreciated his varied performances. We understand that he shortly intends, at the urgent request of his friends, to give a public entertainment in Beechworth, and those who wish to pass a pleasant evening should go to see him. He possesses an inexhaustible fund of humour, is a splendid conjurer, a capital mimic, a first-rate ventriloquist, and in fact can do almost anything. We don't hear anything more from him for about 18 months, and in December 1879. Mr Gus Peirce. We're informed that Mr Gus Peirce, well known in Echuca and on the Murray, intends shortly to pay the border town a visit. He is at present residing in Geelong, engaged in painting a series of panoramic views illustrative of Australian scenery and Murray River views especially. Mr Peirce expects to exhibit in Echuca on the night of Boxing Day. And 2 weeks later, he's at the Theatre Royal in Castlemaine for only one night. And it's called Bignell and Captain Gus Peirce's Colossal Panoramic Mirror of Australia, the greatest diorama in the colonies, specially painted by Captain Peirce for exhibition in Great Britain at the enormous cost of £4,000. A week later, as was promised at the Temperance Hall in Echuca, benefit to Captain Gus Peirce, colossal exhibition. 5 months later, he is listed in Geelong. So back at Geelong where he's living, the Cigar Divan, Great Malop Street, Captain Gus Peirce, boss. An institution of this kind has long been wanting in Geelong. In fact, no town or city of any importance in Europe or the US can boast of many of these necessary adjuncts of civilization. It is a well-established axiom that the man who smokes thinks like a sage and acts like a philosopher. Those central and extensive premises next to Wright's Jewellers and opposite the town clock have been fitted up, regardless of cost, as the grand central divan, where the lovers of the fragrant weed may enjoy their otium cum dignitate without the evils attendant upon the use of intoxicating beverages. Coffee as in Paris. He recorded in his memoirs that Joseph Nash, an age reporter, asked him to go to Greta to take sketches as the Kellys had been captured. Well, this was in June 1880. We arrived just after Kelly was taken and witnessed the placing of the dead bodies of the outlaws in the courtyard to be photographed. Ned was tried in Melbourne. After his trial, I saw him hanged on the scaffold. He turned coward. On the 6th of June, 1881, Captain Gus Peirce, the local amateur artist of Malop Street, may claim to be an animal painter. He has just finished, to the order of a sportsman in the district, an oil painting of Robert the Devil, a celebrated racehorse on the English turf, taken from a pictorial newspaper engraving. And he did quite a few of those for rich racehorse owners and seemed quite profitable for him. In 1881, I mentioned about the Mirror of Australia panoramas that toured Geelong and Castlemaine. Well, he added a male impersonator, Alan Tremaine, in 1881 to his bill. Gus was head scene painter for the Geelong Exhibition Theatre, in which he had a financial interest. And he was mentioned in the Geelong media quite often for the beautiful scenery that he created. On the 5th of July, 1882, the glorious 4th. Yesterday being the anniversary of the American independence, a few flags bearing the stars and stripes were floated to the breeze in honour of the event. In the evening, a convivial gathering took place at the Black Bull Hotel in Malop Street, which has recently come under the management of Mr Gus Peirce, the well-known artist. The gathering was a very jovial one, and the 4th of July was duly celebrated, the popular host of the hotel providing an excellent repast for the occasion. So he's now gone from his smoking room business to a pub. On the 17th of March 1883, it's mentioning about Gus being the proprietor of the Black Bull Hotel in Geelong. And it says the proprietor of the Black Bull Hotel, Mr Gus Peirce, is about making the bar of that hostelry rather novel in appearance. Mr Peirce is very clever with the brush and paint, and he's already painted 2 pieces of Swiss scenery, 6 feet by 5 feet, which may be viewed on the wall. On the opposite wall there are to be 2 views, one representing Corio Bay from the Moorabool Wharf, the new steamer Excelsior steaming towards the channel occupying the middle ground, whilst the background will be occupied by a view of the You Yangs. The other painting will be a scene of the Barwon River, the subject being taken from the recent regatta on that stream. Overlooking the entrance to the bar, there'll be a painting 16 foot by 5 foot, giving a view of winter sports in Geelong, the subject being a football match on the Corio cricket ground. And only a week later, a fraud summons. A.B. Pierce was summoned by Thomas Batten to show cause with regard to non-payment of a judgment of £16. Augustus Peirce deposed that an order was made against him for £16 for meat supplied to him by Thomas Batten, butcher. The reason he had not paid the money was owing to the want of funds. Since the judgment, he'd received £100 and the money had been paid away to many of his creditors in order to enable him to keep his business as a publican going. He had no furniture. He had paid £30 to Mr Grist, who assisted him in painting scenery, £9 to an assistant, £5 to the grocer, £18 for rent, £20 to a wine and spirit merchant. He was paying 2 judgment creditors £1 a week. O'Neill received £8 or £9 and another creditor £5. His hotel receipts were not in excess of his expenditure. He had a wife and 2 children to support. The summons was dismissed. In March 1884, the Geelong Amateur Dramatic Club, the scenery painted by Mr Gus Peirce for the first production of the piece was used. In the latter piece, Mr Gus Peirce, who will make his first appearance as Colonel Ike Saucepan, will introduce some startling novelties in the art of conjuring. And then on the 17th of September 1886, portrait painting in Geelong. One of the very best efforts made by Mr Gus Peirce, artist of this town, at portrait painting is that of an almost life-sized likeness of Mr George Coppin, the celebrated and most successful actor, which has just been completed and is now on view in Frank & Co.'s shop in Mellop Street. It's a watercolour, and the work was entrusted to Mr Gus Peirce of Geelong, whose fame is spread throughout the colony and who has upon this occasion excelled on all previous efforts in the particular line referred to. This picture is undoubtedly a first-class one, reflecting the highest credit on the abilities of Mr Peirce, who may reasonably expect to be called upon to do additional work of a similar character, and it's pleasing to know that we have in Geelong an artist who was able to command orders from the metropolis of this kind, which has led to the painting in question. And 2 years later, banner painting in Geelong. Adding to his other artistic work, Mr Gus Peirce has proven himself as adept in the use of pencil and brush, and whose oil and watercolour paintings from time to time have been highly and deservedly praised, has commenced a new industry in Geelong in the painting of banners. On the 22nd of April 1889, there was a concert at the Mechanics Hall, and he's back doing his entertainment. Captain Gus Peirce created great amusement with his original after-dinner speech, Happiness. On the 11th of April 1890, the article's titled A Footballer's Social. The members and supporters of the Geelong Football Club spent an exceptionally convivial period last evening. Mr Gus Peirce, as a humorist, kept his auditors in uncontrollable mirth by his stump speeches, recitations and songs. And then in the next month, it mentions that Mr Gus Peirce's furniture and effects, including a new piano, oil paintings and watercolours by himself, will be sold by Abraham and Sutherland on the premises Victoria Terrace. So Gus left Geelong in 1892. They did hold a farewell benefit, but it was a bit of a disaster. He'd prepared some lithographed handbills advertising the event, which featured caricatures of leading Geelong citizens, and this was not very well received, and several artists who promised to perform withdrew their support. To cap it off, the night was wet and stormy, and though many tickets had been sold, few people turned up. In June 1890, he's running the Rose of Australia Hotel in North Melbourne. It says during the land boom, Peirce bought the Rose of Australia Hotel near the Metropolitan Meat Market, Melbourne, and disposed of it when the boom burst. So while he was in Melbourne, just before he left, he developed advertising for along the railway line in Victoria. He operated a print studio with S.T. Gill, that was another famous artist of the goldfields, and he devoted quite a lot of time to his art. Gus Peirce remained in Australia until 1892, and he returned to Medford, Massachusetts, where he continued to paint. And there was an article announcing Gus's return. In Australia, 36 years, Captain Gus Peirce arrives in Boston after a long absence. A few days ago, Captain Gus Peirce, formerly of West Bedford, arrived in Boston after 36 years' absence in Australia. When only a lad of 19, he shipped for a voyage to Australia and with a boyish love of adventure ran away from the ship at Melbourne and has passed through many strange scenes since then, living in what was then a wild country. He's been engaged in different pursuits. When he left home, he'd been a student in the Old Lowell Institute School of Design. For the past few years, he's taken up his old work and revived his love for art. He's been connected with various papers as an illustrator. He brings with him a number of beautiful watercolours of Australian scenes. Although Captain Peirce appears much like an Englishman, he has never during his long residence given up his allegiance to his own country and flag, but still retains his old New England feeling. Captain Peirce was married in Australia, where he has 2 sons. He's now visiting his brother, Mr E.N. Peirce of Holmwood Hill, Waltham, who, when he heard his brother was en route, travelled 1,000 miles to meet him in the province of Ontario. Captain Peirce came by the way of Vancouver. And there were some reminiscences of Gus Peirce in the paddle steamer days. It says that his American influence was great on the Murray. The Lady Daly used to fly a large American flag on her jackstaff. He was a man of some pride and pretension. He used to wear a spotlessly clean uniform of dark blue cloth, the coat bearing a double row of gilt buttons, the blue peaked cap flaunting his own cipher embroidered in gold above the British coat of arms. Augustus was recorded living at Waltham, Massachusetts in 1912, and he listed his occupation as master mariner. He died on the 11th of February 1920 in Wheeling, Ohio, West Virginia, and he was buried in Boston, and he stated that he was widowed in the death certificate. So that leaves his wife and children. What happened to Agnes Carney, whom he married in 1869, could find very little on his wife Agnes. She is recorded in 1893 as living in Northcote, and in late 1894 Augustus is living at North Melbourne, so different addresses but not too far away from each other. Agnes died in Melbourne in 1899 at the age of 47. His 2 sons, there is a record on the 9th of April 1894, a street row, a man's skull injured. At the City Court this morning, Herbert and Augustus Peirce, brothers, and James Young, all of North Melbourne, were charged with assaulting John Mayers. The disturbance took place at the corner of Elizabeth and Queensby Street. And then on the 9th of October 1896, it mentions that Gus and Bert Peirce have inherited the artistic talents of their father, Bert being a most finished coach decorator, in which calling there is scope for unbounded skill and taste. Augustus Baker Pierce Jr. died in 1921 in Victoria. In 1892 he was living with his father in Elizabeth Street, North Melbourne, and in 1903 to 1909 he was recorded in the census as a hairdresser living in North Melbourne, and then listed as an artist living in North Melbourne in 1913. So the death record says, on the 1st of May at Melbourne Hospital, Augustus Baker, dearly loved eldest son of Captain Gus and the late Agnes Peirce, and loving brother of Herbert, late of Geelong, aged 32 years. And then 5 years after his death, his brothers put a memorial notice in, Peirce, in loving memory of my dear brother Augustus, Gus, who died on the 1st of May 1921 at Melbourne, son of the late Augustus Baker, and Agnes Peirce, late of Geelong, inserted by his brother Bert Peirce Carlton. So Herbert, or Bert Edward Peirce, he painted advertisements like his father did in 1897. He mainly lived in Carlton, and as was mentioned, he was a coach painter as well as an artist. He lived in Casterton, Victoria in 1914, and he died on the 12th of June 1935 in Melbourne. And an article referring to Bert on the 2nd of July 1897. Harry Tucker. We would draw attention to the advertisement of Mr Harry Tucker, hairdresser of Elizabeth Street. The outside artistic painting in the way of a hairdresser's advertisement, executed by Mr Bert Peirce, son of Captain Gus Peirce, is a splendid piece of work and the only one of its kind in Melbourne. But unfortunately, his sons died in their early adulthood and didn't have children of their own, so there's no living direct descendants of Mr Gus Peirce, a very multi-talented man.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.